Hey, everyone, good morning. For those of you who are Sidebar members, this is going to be an exciting Sidebar session. I'm Shalini. I've been a Sidebar member for about a year and a half. I love getting in and helping to moderate some of these sessions. It's been really amazing to learn from our peers and see where people take us with their journeys and these speaking sessions. If you're not a Sidebar member, welcome. These are always open to everyone, and I hope people get to just kind of come in and learn something. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to ask questions about Sidebar or the session, and ping us through the chat, and just connect with people. That's what we're all here for today. So today's session is on negotiation strategy. Our speaker today is Bala Vadlamani. She's the founder and CEO of BSV Advisory and Media, where she serves as a strategic advisor to startup founders and a career growth strategist and coach for product managers. Bala, all of which I'm going to need, so we'll talk afterwards. She's an alumna of Dartmouth. She spent over a decade as a product leader at Meta, Amazon, and Morgan Stanley. And she has experience leading cross-functional teams, cross-company initiatives across diverse domains such as payments, Alexa, trust and safety, and identity management. Things that your friends probably don't think are sexy, but at the same time are super critical, that we should all be knowing more about. Throughout her career, she navigated a lot of high-stakes negotiations that ultimately led her to a seven-figure compensation. She has since then helped over 100 PMs navigate career transitions, land high six or seven figure roles at the world's top tech companies. So today I'm really excited to hear from Bala about negotiating like we mean it. So please welcome Bala Vadlamani. Bala, I'll turn it over to you if you want to share your screen and jump in.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Shalini. I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see it? Perfect. Okay, so really excited to be doing this session with all of you today. I want to open the session with a quick stat. Now, negotiation can mean is something that we do every day in many different contexts, and it can mean many different things. But for the purpose of this session, to make it most useful to the most number of people, we're going to talk about it in the context of careers, in the context of getting a job offer or trying to navigate career growth internally within a company. Quick stat in that context around negotiation. So of all the offers that are made for new jobs, about 75% of the times, employers actually expect you to negotiate, right? They have room built into their compensation band specifically for negotiation. And yet, over half, over 50% of candidates don't even try. They don't negotiate. So when we sit with those two numbers for a second, 3 out of 4 employers are expecting you to negotiate, and then half of us never even try. That gap between what's possible and what we actually accept is what we're here to close or try to close this morning. A little bit about me. Like Shalini mentioned, I've spent over a decade as a product manager at Morgan Stanley, Amazon, and Meta, working across very diverse domains. And along the way, I've had to learn how to negotiate myself. Not from a textbook. I didn't have a playbook or a framework, but mostly from making a ton of mistakes, watching peers that I respected deeply leave money on the table, and then slowly putting all of that together to figure out what actually works in these conversations and scenarios. The reason I started coaching in the first place was because I repeatedly watched brilliant PMs, designers, engineers, tech professionals, people I genuinely respected, either stay stuck in a job that wasn't facilitating growth, or fail interviews that they could easily crack with the right prep and support, or forego a promo, or accept offers that were 50, 100K, sometimes even 200K below what they deserved and what they could have honestly easily gotten if they negotiated the right way. Not because none of this had to do with whether they were worth it or not. They definitely were great at what they did, but it was because nobody had ever shown them or modeled for them what was actually possible. So today I'm hoping to cover some of that ground with all of you. Before I move any further, I want to get your reaction to this. So when you hear the word negotiation, what is the first emotion that comes up? Please feel free to put it in the chat. Anxiety. Lots of anxiety. Thank you for being honest. Two-way discussion. I like that. Hopeless. Okay. Thank you for being honest and vulnerable again. Tough. Risky. Okay. A winner and a loser. Okay. That's a good one. Fear of losing opportunity. Okay, excellent. I think these are all great answers. So I saw a lot of anxiety, and then I saw a few other terms, like winning and losing and fear of losing the opportunity specifically. These are ones that stick out for me. I love this healthy discussion to arrive at a fair value. Love that. Okay. So if you notice, a lot of what we saw is about our own discomfort about the process of negotiating, right? It's not about most of us struggle to think about negotiation in terms of reaching alignment or the opportunity to actually open doors for you that you didn't have until now, or an exchange of value, which I don't see the name, but I really liked the last comment. That's why it's a healthy discussion to arrive at a fair value. Right? Those are the right frameworks to think about negotiation, but most of us struggle with this, including me. The emotion we bring to negotiation is almost always about protecting yourself. We are worried about being judged. We're worried about looking greedy. We're also worried about what if we're told no at the end of the process, right? And I get it. I felt every single one of those things. And the first time I attempted to negotiate my offer at Amazon, I felt sick to my stomach the night before. So the ick was very real. But here's the reframe that helped me. The discomfort you feel about negotiation is not a sign that you shouldn't do it. It's in fact, think of it as the tax or the very small price you pay for a much, much bigger return. So the way I convinced myself to negotiate is it's a few hours of awkwardness that can buy you, say, financial freedom 5 or 10 years sooner. It's worth it, right? So think of it in terms of like what's at stake on the other side, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go. So hold on to whatever word you just typed, and hopefully you can revisit it at the end and see if it has changed. So let's talk about the cost of not negotiating. What's actually at stake? Most technology professionals, and I say technology professionals because this is an industry in which we deal with larger numbers, most technology professionals forego millions in compensation over the course of their careers. Let that sit for a bit, right? It's not thousands, it's not tens of thousands, it's millions of dollars. That's life-changing money. And here's the part that always gets me. It's almost never because they aren't good enough at their jobs. In fact, it's people who are really great at what they do that are conditioned to believe that their work should speak for itself. Unfortunately, you get what you negotiate. The other thing is, it's these people who are usually taught that they should be, they come from backgrounds where they didn't have too much, and then they're taught you have to be grateful for what you have. All of that has its place in the world. But let me make this concrete. If you accept an offer that is, say, 50,000 below where it could have been, and you stay in tech for, say, the next 20 years, that's 1 million over 20 years without even accounting for compounding, right? Not just compounding of the money, but every subsequent offer, raise, scope that is built on top of this offer. So that one decision to say yes too fast has cost you somewhere between over $500,000, over $1 million over the course of your career. And that's just like one negotiation. Most of us will negotiate at least 5, maybe 6, 7 job offers across our careers. So when you're talking about that type of compounding, that's the kind of money that could set up your whole family for success for the rest of their lives. It could give you early retirement. It could pay for your parents' old age. It can contribute towards the cause you care about. And the list goes on. So when I hear someone say, I just don't want to make a fuss when they're made an offer and they don't want to negotiate, what I hear is you're willing to voluntarily hand over $1 million or more to avoid 60 minutes of discomfort. And that's the trade that we have to stop making. With that, if we need to do this, we have to define what negotiation actually is, right? Because most of us, as we saw in the kinds of words that came up, the emotions that came up when we hear the word, we're operating on the definition that we think in negotiation, there's one side that wins and the other side that loses. While negotiation actually is when you walk away with the best possible outcome for yourself, while the other party also feels like they got a good deal. Right? And the second part is important because if the other side leaves the table feeling cheated or frauded, you didn't really win. You basically have set yourself up for failure just 3 to 6 months down the line because you've lost or damaged trust in the process. Now, here's the mindset shift that I would offer. When you walk into a negotiation, I think a lot of us think we're either asking for charity or we're making a demand. You're doing neither, really, right? When you walk into a negotiation, you are basically presenting the other party with a fair value exchange, as someone rightly pointed out. You're saying, here's what I can deliver for you, and here's the impact I'm going to have on your business, on your life, on your organization. And here's what makes that exchange fair for me. Right? So when you reframe it that way, the ick starts to fade, the fear starts to fade because you're not standing there feeling greedy, feeling like a greedy person. You're standing there as a professional, having a professional conversation about a professional exchange of value. And when you emphasize the exchange of value, you demonstrate what is called tactical empathy. It comes from Chris Voss, who I think wrote the book Never Split the Difference. It is the practice of understanding what is it that the other side values, make them feel genuinely heard and understood for what they value, offer that value to them, and then help them understand what is fair to you to participate in this exchange of value, right? And then the moment you start with understanding what is valuable to them and making them feel heard and understood, negotiation becomes more of a collaborative process instead of a one against the other type of dynamic. So throughout your negotiation, you're going to be holding two things at the same time. You have clarity about what you want, and then the empathy for what the other party values as well. Does that make sense? Can I get a few thumbs up if all of that resonates, if it's all making sense? Okay, sounds good. Okay. So let's bust one of the biggest myths about negotiation, right? I wish someone had showed me this slide like 10 years ago. Most people think that negotiation happens after the whole interview process or at the offer stage. And I've seen people going through, in the context of interviews, I've seen people going through 8, 10 rounds of interviews. They've nailed every single one of them. They get the offer, and then they think, okay, now I have to negotiate. Usually, that is way too late. The truth is, you're negotiating from conversation one throughout the entire interview process. This is also what I think is more broadly broken with career coaching in general. We either have pure interview prep, mock interview platforms and such, or we have negotiation support, or we have the promise of the two, but it's usually for a ridiculously large amount of money and also constrained for the amount of time they support you for. So this is one of the things I do very differently in my coaching practice, which is from get-go, we first start with what is your target ideal outcome, right? And a lot of factors go into that. What is your current scope, seniority? What is it that you should target based on all of that? And then tailor prep for every single conversation with your target company, working backwards from your target goal, right? So think about what happens in the very first recruiter call. Most of us treat that call as it's a formality. You get through it, 30 minutes, you talk a little bit about yourself, learn a little bit about the role, and then you get put into the loop. They usually ask you, what's your current role like? They ask you, what are you looking for? What most people miss is that every single word that you say in those first 30 minutes is important because the recruiter is taking notes. They're kind of deciding in real time what level to slot you in at or what level they can get you to accept eventually, right? And that determines the comp band you're going to negotiate within. So if you sound very junior in the first call, if you talk about tasks instead of outcomes, if you talk about my manager wanted this instead of I decided this was the right course of action and therefore rallied consensus among 3 different organizations to proceed with this, they're going to just mentally understand that, okay, I can actually get away with putting this person in a lower band. And then no matter how brilliant you negotiate at the offer stage, you're kind of fighting against gravity because there's only so much flexibility within a certain band for a certain level, right? So going into from the very first conversation, going in prepared changes everything. And that brings us to the framework we'll be discussing today. But before we get into the actual steps of the framework for how to negotiate successfully, we have to talk about the part that nobody talks about, which I think came up again in all of the emotions people said come up for them when they think about what is negotiation, right? The first step to really successfully overcoming, being able to negotiate successfully is overcoming the psychological hurdles. Taking a quick look at the slide, how many of you have felt any of these? How many of you have experienced your inner voice say any of these things when you think of negotiating? All of us, me included. So these are the most common psychological hurdles that I've seen come up in my coaching practice when I try to help PMs and other tech professionals. So maybe it's worth taking a minute to just break down like how to counter each of these psychological hurdles and overcome them, right? So the first one is the most common one, but it's also the easiest one to overcome. Maybe this is the market rate because the recruiter said so, right? Or I see this in the chat thread. The recruiter said no negotiation allowed. So this is an information gap, right? The easiest way to bridge this and the fastest way to bridge this is to use trusted sources to gather data, be it on levels, on comp structure. And recruiters quote you their range, which is almost always the bottom of the band. And in this market, I have seen recruiters use more aggressive tactics, like saying no negotiation allowed. But that's their incentive structure. It's not personal. It's their job to close the role at the lowest defensible number. It's not malicious, but at the same time, you need to stand your ground, right? Your job is to do better research than go in blind. And then it's to talk to people at the company, use blind levels of fire. And we'll get into this a little bit more on what you can do to better prepare for such objections or such comments from the recruiter. The second is the most common. It's also the hardest one to overcome. Honestly, I've felt it 1,000 times over. I don't deserve so much money, right? I'm going to be vulnerable just for a minute because this is the one that I've struggled with most personally as well. You know, when you come from households where you're barely making ends meet for a long time, and then you start negotiating high six-figure and then seven-figure packages, the first reaction of your own brain is, what did I do to even deserve this kind of money? And I should be grateful for what I have versus trying to ask for more, right? A couple of things helped me, and I've actually seen the same thing said to me over and over again by, again, brilliant peers who think and who've actually navigated really difficult circumstances to come to where they are. And they just feel like it's wrong to want more, right? So the first thing that helped me is stop looking for the feeling of I deserve this to magically appear and start building evidence. We all have had career successes, so you can write down a list of concrete wins from your career. These can be the launches, the metrics, the cross-functional teams you led, the difficult challenges you overcame. Write them down. And the second piece is build evidence as you prepare for the interview. So if say usually for a senior level PM role, you end up spending 40 hours, 50 hours preparing, I recommend preparing 200 hours, 100 hours or 200 hours, right? By the time you walk into that final round, you're not wondering, do you deserve it? Do you deserve to be slotted in at this level? You're confident that you do deserve it. And that shows up in how you handle the pushback, how you handle these conversations. The second thing that helped me with do I deserve this type of money hurdle is it's more philosophical, but stay with me, right? It's reframing what the money is for. I think most of us have been taught growing up, money is not the goal, wanting more money is greedy, but really, money is a great enabler. It's a great vehicle for you to accomplish many things that you want to do. It could be buying a home for your parents. It could be being financially free by a certain time. It can be supporting certain causes. Whatever your why is, money can be a great enabler for that. So reframe it in that way. And the third thing I hear also very often is, will they think I am greedy, right? Remember the stat I opened with. Three-fourths of employers actually expect you to negotiate, and negotiating well does not make you seem any less. In fact, in my experience, every time I've successfully negotiated a higher comp number, a raise, whatever that may be, it actually makes them respect you more because it shows them that you know your own value, right? And senior leaders are looking for people who can advocate for themselves
Our
because,
boss is going to be late, but we should still probably show up on time, right?
Danielle, I think you're
Oh.
on mute.
Mhm.
Okay. So I was saying, they want people who can advocate for themselves because it's the same people who can advocate for a team. It's the same person who can advocate for a trade-off decision with 3 or 4 VPs 6 months down the line. So your willingness to negotiate is actually evidence to the hiring team of your seniority. So I would highly recommend to lean into it. Maybe she was practicing her negotiation skills. Um, cool. So the fourth one is it's probably easier to avoid the ick. And again, this one I've personally felt a lot. But again, I'd encourage you to think about, I'm not gonna say pretend the ick goes away. Like I said, the first time, the second time you negotiate, you're probably gonna feel sick to your stomach. But the thing that I would offer is ask yourself, like, am I willing to endure 1 or 2 hours of awkwardness cumulatively across the entire process in exchange for whatever that thing on the other side is, right? Financial freedom, early retirement, paying for kids' tuition, whatever that thing could be. And when I framed it that way, the answer was obvious. And I've seen for a lot of people that is the final unlock they need. It's okay, I'll get through, like, interviews are hard. There's so many things in life that we do are hard, but we do them anyway, right? So we go through the ick, the awkwardness, because what's at stake is more important. Okay, so I want to just pause here. This psychological work, honestly, is where I spend most time with the people that I help. And I also encourage all of you to spend some time with the psychological work because the mindset is what unlocks the tactics actually working or not, right? I see a question in the chat. The recruiter changed my offer to an exploding offer the minute I tried to negotiate based on a competing offer, closing the door for any negotiation. So, Vidhi, are you saying that um, when you say exploding offer, do you mean it matched the competing offer and it was a number you were very happy with, or what do you mean by that?
No, actually, in fact, this was at Meta. I know you've also been at Meta. So I had a Meta offer, I had a competing offer from Google,
Mhm.
and I actually wanted to go to Meta, but I also wanted to negotiate based on the Google offer. But the
Right.
minute I mentioned that, the recruiter was like, okay, you have 2 days to decide if you're going to accept this offer as is. Otherwise, we're just rescinding the offer.
Yeah, so I'll say a few things there. First off, these deadlines are artificial. They're not, they're manufactured, right? Negotiation processes I've seen have gone on for 3 to 4 weeks. And so 2 days is not, it doesn't make sense. The second thing I'll say is um, when a recruiter does that, it's usually a tactic to see if you're bluffing on the Google offer. So if you can, there are strategies you can use, specific things you can say to signal to them that you're invested in wanting to join this company for XYZ reasons. You're interested in the work, really excited about the scope, but if they can not help you bridge the gap, then you must be able to signal some willingness to walk away. And the third thing I'll say is in these situations, if someone is just trying to force you into a corner, and even though you genuinely have a competing offer, if they are unwilling to budge, that's a red flag, right? Companies, like I said, want candidates who can negotiate well because those are the candidates who usually do well on the job as well. But if they are closing the door on you, it's a red flag and it's a signal on what's the kind of culture you're getting into at this point in time. So I've never ever seen a scenario where with a real competing offer, in fact, even without a real competing offer, I've been able to see 100K plus raise in comp. And this is not pre 2022. This is all recent, right, in the past year or so. But if someone's saying this is the final offer, take it or leave it, they're either bluffing and seeing if you budge. And if you don't budge, they usually do meet you where you need them to be. And if they don't do that, then it's a really big red flag about the culture. I hope that answers the question, but happy to answer any follow-ups.
Sure, thank you.
Also happy to I know every negotiation scenario is so there's so much context for every scenario. So I'm happy to continue conversations after the session as well. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send over any questions you have, because again, every situation is unique and it deserves that amount of time and focus. But in order to help you guys navigate these types of situations, this is the simple 5-step framework I usually recommend. It starts with doing your research, right? Let's get into that one in a little more detail. So before you hop on that very first call with the recruiter, you have to know cold what is the leveling structure, what is the comp structure, what are the comp ranges for different levels at this company. Specifically for companies like Meta, Stripe, which don't publicly advertise which level they're hiring for, every job description says product manager. The level is not very clear. You want to go in having this information, knowing which level matches the scope of the work you're already doing or you want to be doing. And then once you have that information, use it in that initial call with the recruiter for a few different things. First is you frame your current experience in the context of the level you want to be operating at, right? You go in there triangulating information from multiple sources, Levels FYI, Blind, Glassdoor, LinkedIn salary data, trusted peers in the industry, Slack groups, Discord groups, whatever. Talk to a recruiter, talk to a coach. The whole point is you go in armed with information. You can also ask the recruiter for this information. Good recruiters will be transparent and give it to you and actually appreciate that you gather this data before giving them what comp range you're looking for. And then use that to really shine in that conversation with the recruiter, right? The next step is to actually set yourself up for success. Now, what does this mean? Think of, like I said, negotiation starts with the very first conversation, and then it's going to go on throughout the course of the interview process. And there are specific times throughout this process where you can plant cues, plant flags for the hiring team to understand what your target is, right? And there's a number of ways you can do this. One of the most powerful questions you can ask the hiring manager or the recruiter in the initial stages is, what is the number one thing keeping you up at night about this product, about this organization, about this team? Listen carefully to the answer. And that answer is exactly what you're going to map your experience to in the same round or in the next round. Right? You understand what they value and then frame your experience in that language. This is one way to set yourself up for success. The second way is to really, as I was mentioning, plant the cues early in the process, especially if levels are not published. You could say something like, given the extensive leadership experience I've had leading a similar product with large cross-functional influence, I'm curious, what level are you thinking of bringing someone in at? And notice what that question does, right? You've not asked for a number. You've not made a demand. You've gently signaled in very initial stages that you're thinking about the level. You're thinking about the scope and impact you get to have. And you've asked them to share more information about this. So if they come back saying, say you want to target L7, and they say this is an L5 and we just can't bring in anyone higher than that. Now that's a hard constraint, right? And that gives you information to say, okay, that's great. I've saved myself 50 to 100 hours of interview prep time. But usually they say, okay, there is flexibility, right? Usually they say, yeah, we were thinking of bringing someone in as an L6, but there's flexibility to also bring in as an L7, but we'll let the interview decide how that goes. And that's a green flag. You don't need them to basically say, yes, we'll bring you in at whichever level you want to come in at those initial stages. All you need them to say is there is flexibility, right? And then you use the interview process to prove that you belong at that level. See a question from Sue. Would it make sense then to say negotiation would even start as far as the resume? Yes, so that's why the research is so important, right? The way you frame your experience in your resume and in that first recruiter call, it should all be working backwards from what your target is. So if you're targeting L7 or L6 kind of roles at Meta or Stripe, it doesn't make sense to talk about your scope and your impact in terms of specific features or in terms of specific tasks you did. You need to up-level your framing, both in your resume and in that initial conversation. Once you set yourself up for success, like in those initial stages, use the interview process or any further conversations you have with the team to build leverage. Right? Leverage is one of the most important terms to help you negotiate successfully. And in the context of salary negotiation, it usually comes from two sources, and both of them need to work together. The first source is you have to prove you are valuable to them. This happens through demonstrating genuine interest in the role, recruiting the recruiter to advocate for you, recruiting the people who have interviewed you to become your advocates, strong advocates during the calibration process. People you connect with, like people who have walked out of the session with you saying, we have to hire her. or specific things from your experience, your domain expertise that make you uniquely fit this particular role. All of this is how you are valuable to them. That's one piece of building leverage, right? The other piece is signaling that the market values you too. This could be by mentioning you have other live conversations in similar stages of interviews with other equivalent or competing offers with other companies. This is basically you're telling them, I have credible alternatives to saying yes to this specific opportunity. Now, both of these together is what build your leverage, right? Specifically, what I said about being in demand, the term for that, I think, by Harvard is BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And what that does is basically, if you're signaling to them, if this specific deal falls apart, you have other equally good things, if not better things to go to, right? In any negotiation, if your honest answer is, what if this doesn't work out, is nothing, if it's nothing else, if it's nothing good, it usually puts you at a position of weakness, right? You want your answer to be, I have 2 other live conversations. I'm fine either way. I'm going to pick what is the best thing for me based on all the information I gathered during this process. That way, you have a lot of leverage, and that is your source of power. Now, some people ask me, what if I don't have a competing offer? That's fine. But even in that scenario, you do have the specific skill set that you bring, which makes you a great fit for the role to use as leverage. I see a few questions. So Vidhi says, Meta, Google, Amazon have interview loops for the level they want to slot you at. So the negotiation for the level should happen before jumping into the interview loop. Yes and no. So Amazon, definitely the loop, they're very transparent with what level they're bringing you in at. So I think that discussion should happen with the recruiter before. For Meta, yes and no. So say someone's trying to get in at L6. I've seen this happen very often with people trying to move from L6 at Amazon to Meta, say. They'll try to slot you in at L4, L5, and all of those titles are called product manager right until L7 at Meta, right? And yes, the loop is different for an L7 at Meta. You have an additional leadership round. Versus L6 through L4 to L6, it's all the same type of loop. So you start planting the right flags and cues with the recruiter, with the hiring team. And we'll just get to the next step, which is super important, which is reinforcing at the right points in time. So that, say the initial interview loop is the same for all L4 through L7, but you're targeting L7. And so after you get positive feedback from your first round, you use that as, again, leverage with the recruiter to get you to be evaluated at the level you want to go in at. So something that would look like is, say the recruiter comes back to you after the first round of interviews and says, the team really enjoyed your last round. Usually people say, thank you, I'm really excited about this role. That's fine, but you've basically lost an opportunity to negotiate there, right? What's a better response is to say, great to hear, I'm excited to deliver on XYZ at the principal level scope or the L7 level scope at this company. I'd like to be evaluated at that level as the process continues. What you're doing here is you're using a moment of positive feedback from the recruiter, from the hiring team. You're acknowledging it, you're staying warm. And what you're doing is then you're turning that into an opportunity to reinforce to them that, hey, I'm really invested in driving this level of impact, and I'd like to be evaluated at that level as the process continues. And I've seen this happen over and over again, where the recruiter would have said, no, we can only maybe do L5 at the most. And then, the interview performance is really strong. So they're able to make an L6 offer happen. Or similarly, the performance is so strong that they're able to add the leadership loop to the last round and make an L7 offer possible. Okay, since we have about 15 minutes left, maybe let's get to the next slide, and then I'll pause to answer all the other remaining questions in the chat thread. The last thing I'll say is don't rush once you have the offer, right? I've seen these ultimatums by recruiters so often. To Vidhi's point earlier, Meta in particular has been notorious for the past year and a half to give people offers and then put them in a limbo for team matching for over 6 to 8 months. So it does not make sense for a company doing that to say, sign in 2 days or the offer will be rescinded. It definitely, so the thing is to go in aware about these tactics, right? And to not rush at the offer stage. Remember that the recruiter does this every week with candidates, but you get to do this every few years for your career. And so when you are told the offer expires in 72 hours, slow down. A few tools to slow yourself down. The first is a very powerful tool. It's called tactical silence. So you state, and it's one of the most underused tools. I've struggled with using it too, because I think we're all wired to kind of fill in the silence. So we state what we want, and then we quickly start apologizing for it or defending it. But tactical silence is basically where you state your number, you state your stance, you share the data that you have and the rationale behind why you're asking for what you're asking, and then you stop talking. And then you let the silence sit. If it's few days, let it be a few days, right? It'll feel like 10 years, but that signals strength. For the recruiter, for the hiring team, that's when they understand, okay, this person is not bluffing, right? They are the ones who will then come in and try and fill the silence by moving toward you, by offering something that makes it more meaningful of an offer for you, or at least by trying to problem solve. I think the instinct most people have is to rescue the awkwardness by trying to fill in, and we don't want to do that. The second thing is to pull different levers, right? This is where the initial research around understanding what the different components of the compensation structure is so important. There's sign-on, there's equity, there's target performance bonus, which varies by level. There's the base pay, obviously. So of these, usually base pay is the one that people are most constrained on. There's still some flexibility, but there's, there's some real constraints there. There's more flexibility with equity. And then there's even more flexibility with sign-on bonuses. So just understand what the different levers are, and then always ask the question like, what's the flexibility with other components of compensation? And you'll usually see that they'll come back with, or you can ask, can we explore other options to, move other pieces of compensation here? Usually that invites them to a conversation than making a demand. And, that gets both the recruiting team and the hiring team into problem-solving mode versus you versus them. The last thing I'll say is knowing your worth, right? This is the final lever. It's the willingness to walk away. I have seen scenarios where you just know that even though you've presented all the right information, you know that the market rate is commensurate with what you're asking, you deserve it at that level, still they won't budge just because they know it's a bad market and like, where have you got to go or whatever. That's a red flag. And so genuine willingness to walk away is leverage in those situations. If you show that you're committed to making a good faith effort to make this work, you demonstrate genuine interest in the work, do great on the interviews, and at the end of it all, if they're unable to meet you where you need them to meet you, being willing to walk away gives you leverage, right? I'll just say one final thing. This is a sample script that I recently used with someone who didn't even have a competing offer. And we basically said to the recruiter who had given her an ultimatum that this is a take it or leave it offer, basically said, I'm targeting 500K, really excited about the opportunity to work at this company, really struck a chord with the entire team through the course of the interview. I'm confident, given my track record, that I'll be able to bring certain amount of tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars in value in revenue within the first 6 months of being on the team. However, the 100K or 150K delta is hard for me to reconcile given my competing offers are in my desired range, and I'd love your help with bridging that gap. If we can align on compensation, this is the right step for me. Thank you for your partnership and advocacy. So when you look at the structure there, right, we're starting with numbers. We're explaining what's the data behind the target numbers. We're showing excitement, and then we're inviting them into a partnership when we're saying, I'd love your help bridging the gap. And then we're ending with thank you for your partnership and advocacy. There's no demand, there's no ultimatum, you're not saying or else I'm walking, but you are saying that the gap is significant enough for me to reconsider other options. And this worked for this candidate, even without a competing offer in this market, because she had done so well in the interview and had, really built trust with the team, with her performance. So it really worked. So this kind of message is something that I, again, help work line by line based on the specific context and situation of the specific candidate. But what I'll say is not rushing is one of the best things you can do. And here are some common mistakes that people make. I let folks review the slide by themselves while we open up for questions, but given we have only 10 minutes.
Bala, I think this might be a good place to jump into a couple of the questions that I see in the chat. And I think you've actually answered a good number of these. I think relating to, how do you think about this when you're looking internally or especially internally within the FANGs? Maybe one of the questions that we can go deeper into is, what about when you're not actually changing roles? You're kind of just trying to do an internal negotiation. This is always that challenge of the company, or especially larger ones, responding and saying, we're not just going to be doing 20% jumps for everyone every year just to keep you at market level. How do you address that?
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, this is one of the most common questions I get these days, especially given people don't want to be job searching in this market. There's a few things. The framework is the same for internal growth versus external. So think of what's your leverage when you're trying to move within a company, right? One of the first things is the product, the users, you've built the cross-functional relationships. So you need to help them see the cost of you leaving, and you need to make that cost of you leaving visible so that they understand it, right? Say you've been at the company for a couple of years, you know the system, the people, the political map. Replacing you would basically mean 3 to 6 months of basically someone else having to jump up into that scope. And so using that as your leverage is good. Now, there's two other main pieces of leverage internally. The first is, at most companies these days, especially big companies, giving you a director title or a formal promo is really difficult for various organizational, political, other budget constraints, and so on. But usually there is scope if you are a top performer, if you're someone who've built trust with key stakeholders in your org, to get you to a comp level that is commensurate with the higher level, even without the formal title. I've seen this happen very often. And so, I call it the title-less race. So usually, even though the actual promo may lag by a couple of quarters or promo cycles, you can negotiate a raise in comp. But all of this is if you've been able to build trust. And while external negotiations happen within 3 to 4 weeks, maybe including the interview process, 2 to 3 months, you should keep in mind that internal negotiations happen over multiple quarters or even halves. So you should start planting the right seeds, say 12 months in advance, so that you can figure out, okay, am I going to actually be able to make a case partnering with my manager for promo? And if that's not possible in this upcoming cycle, can I then pull the right levers to get a raise that I want and puts me in the band for the next level, even though the actual promo may lag by a couple quarters.
Okay, that's awesome. And then, all right, I know we're almost at the end. I think we have time for two more
I saw this
questions.
one question I'm trying to get to. I think it's on for range provided in the job description. Yes, that range exists, but in many job requisitions at Google, it says program manager and they give a range. Does that mean that range is fixed or there is some flexibility? Okay. So when anytime the job description or title specifically doesn't talk about what level the role is at, it's a good question to ask the recruiter. And again, do your research and frame it as I've been performing at this scope, at this level of impact, and I want to be able to continue to grow that scope and impact. And therefore, I'm curious what's the level you're thinking of bringing in the candidate for this position. And that'll usually give you some information on what they're thinking. Then you can talk about, hey, I want to be able to perform at this level. Is there flexibility to bring someone in at that level? If the answer is a hard no, then you can ask them to connect you with opportunities that actually match your scope, experience, and level of impact. If not, usually they'll say, yes, there's flexibility, and you can use the interview to prove to them that they actually should evaluate you at that higher level.
Great. And since we're almost 5 minutes in, 5 minutes to the end, do we have any other questions? Anyone want to raise their hand and ask?
I have a question. I think Daniel already asked that. So, what would you recommend for people changing industries? So, let's say someone has been in a technical role and then now they are trying to get to a management role. What would the approach be?
I think when you're moving industries, again, it's about trying to figure out what it is that in your existing experience can you use as leverage to frame yourself up as the ideal candidate for this target role, right? If you can get that piece right of framing your unique point of view, perspective, experience in terms of what this particular role is, what's valuable in this particular role, you still have leverage. Now, that said, you will see a lot of people who have moved functions or industries who've had to take a slight title or role, like going to a slightly lower level or title when they're moving industries. And while that's not uncommon, I've also seen that it all comes down to how you frame your leverage from get-go. If you come into the conversation saying, hey, I'm actually moving industries, I don't have a lot of experience in this particular space, obviously they're going to try to down level you. But if you frame it as this is everything, this is the wealth of experience and knowledge and domain expertise I bring to the table, and this is the work, say you're moving to a PM role, this is the product oriented work I've already been doing, this is just a matter of a title change, then you have much more leverage. And again, competing offers always help. So I think it's very subjective, depending on how much of leverage you've built for your case for a higher level, a higher offer. That's what drives outcomes. That's where I think being very intentional about it from day one is important.
Thank you.
Okay, well, amazing. A few more questions in the chat that have popped up. One thing I want to just mention before we hop off, I threw a survey into the chat. This is the Sidebar survey on the session. We'd love your feedback on this. Bala, thank you. This was great. I think we all learned a lot. I'm sure we also have a lot more questions for you, and we'd love to have you back and just, take everyone's questions and continue to offer this brilliance of just reinforcing that which we all know, but then we get nervous about. And I'm one of the people with answered anxiety. So I'm glad that everyone else shares that feeling and that we know that we're all in this together.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the session too. Thank you all so much for joining. I do think the recording will be available for them after, right? I saw a few questions.
Yeah, so the recording is generally available for Sidebar members. If you are not a Sidebar member, please feel free to ping us on LinkedIn and we will figure out how to get you in touch with Bala if you're open to that.
Yeah.
Or just make the slides available at some point.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to put this up. So if folks want to connect with me on LinkedIn, and there's any unanswered questions, you want to continue the conversation, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can just scan this QR code and that'll take you to my profile. Always happy to be of help. Again, coaching is something I got into because I'm really passionate about helping people grow their careers and living to their full potential. So happy to be of help.
Okay, thank you so much, Bala. Everyone online, have a great day. Feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good Friday.
Have a great rest of your day. Bye.